Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Like always, get ready to catch up on the biggest international news of the week. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get to detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. The stage seems set for a war on Syria after UK backs out. US continues to look for partners to go ahead with a military strike. World Panorama gets you the full picture. It's worse than originally thought out to be. Japanese nuclear reactor raises severity level of Fukushima radioactive leak to serious. No knockout blow in Australian election debate. Kevin Rudd and Tony Abbott face off in the third and final round. And also stay tuned for some red carpet action. The 70th edition of the Venice Film Festival kicks off with big stars and bigger movies. Our top story this week. Allegations of a chemical weapons attack carried out by the Syrian regime last week have heightened tensions internationally. There's been tough talk from Western leaders and a flurry of activity by the United States, all of which seem to suggest that a military strike against the regime could be in the offing. But through it all, Syria seems to retain the support of some good friends: Russia, Iran and China. Given the spiraling humanitarian disaster that has overtaken the country during the last 2 years of conflict, continued inaction appears to be an untenable reality. The death toll is now well over 1 lakh. There are 2 million refugees, half of whom are children. Yet it was the apparent chemical weapons attack in the suburbs around Damascus, known as Ghouta, last week, that has served as an impetus for international military intervention into the conflict. Amidst the rhetoric and war rehearsals, clarity on what's really happening seems to be cast aside in the media. So let's lay out the facts threadbare. Ask some basic questions about what really is happening in Syria, like were chemical weapons used at all? If so, then who did it? And if the US goes ahead with that military intervention, what would be the justification for such a move? And will it end the crisis, or something could go horribly wrong there? With me in the studio this week is Meena Singh Roy, Senior Fellow at the IDSA. Welcome to the show, ma'am. Before we get to answering all of those questions, here's a look at what's been happening in Syria. Heavy shelling continues in Syria, and so do the airstrikes, even as the US and its allies are considering military action against the regime.
Our approach is to continue to find an international coalition that will act together. And I think you're seeing a number of countries say publicly, state their position on the use of chemical weapons. We'll continue to consult with our allies and our partners and friends.
Preparations for an all-out war have already begun. Russia has sent 2 warships to the East Mediterranean. Hectic activity was seen at Turkey's Incirlik Air Base, a key for the US Air Force. The Israeli army was put on alert in the occupied Golan Heights bordering Syria. Over in Britain, suffering an embarrassing blow in Parliament, MPs refused to support the Prime Minister and sided with Labour in opposing a government motion which supported the principle of military intervention.
Politics is difficult. It wouldn't, of course, that involved going to Parliament, making an argument in a strong and principled way, but then listening to Parliament. I think the American public, the American people, and President Obama will understand that.
The vote means the US may now have to rely on France as its main ally. A spokesperson for Syria's opposition voiced disappointment over a British parliamentary vote.
We are clearly disappointed. The UK prides itself its humanitarian track record. However, they're not going to participate in stopping Assad from using chemical weapons against children in Syria.
Appearing on state television, Bashar al-Assad vowed to defend Syria against any aggression from the West. Now the UN inspectors are headed back after having spent the week visiting rebel-controlled areas on the outskirts of Damascus. After reports of a poisonous gas attack last week that the opposition blames on President Bashar al-Assad. The Syrian government accuses the rebels of firing chemical munitions at civilians and soldiers. Syria braces for a war. Already, at least 100,000 people have been killed in the conflict that began in March 2011, and every day hundreds of people die or struggle with injuries. But the worst, it seems, is yet to come. All right, let's start getting some answers to those questions. Ms. Roy, first up, tell me that the chemical weapons attack, has it really happened? That hasn't been proved. The UN team was just there. Investigation results are not even out, and the US already considering military intervention. Now, what people would ask, is that justified?
Well, the fact is that the chemical weapons have been used. That is the fact. But what is not very clear is who used it. And at the moment, there are allegations, and the United States says that, it's the regime which has used the chemical weapons. Now, there are no confirmed sort of reports saying the regime has. How do you prove that? Right. But the US says that its intelligence reports, confirm that the regime has used it. I think what is worrying, the region and the international community is that the use of chemical weapon, and that too on the civilians, and how it was used, who used it, that's still a mystery. For people, even people who've been watching from a distance, like those who are doing research on it, we really don't know what the reality, right. The fact is.
This is a very, tough decision, whether to attack Syria or not, because the fact is that many people have died within Syria in this, in what we've been seeing over the past 2.5 years with the Assad regime in place. But now, if you see a military intervention, those numbers are going to go up dramatically.
Absolutely. The cost obviously, has to be paid by the country and the people of that country. That is what it appears at the moment. Whether America, United States is going to attack Syria, that still remains a question. They are well prepared. The statements that are coming out from, Washington, they do confirm that they are ready to do it. When will that happen? We really don't know. But what is worrisome is the impact that it will have. Even if the attack happens, they say it will be limited. They'll strike. Exactly. So whatever it is, the consequences are going to be disastrous. That's what we can,
That's right. Having said that, do you see no chances of perhaps a negotiation? Assad has been defined from the very beginning, and even now the allies are not pushing for, settling this on the table?
Well, let's see. There are economic interests, there are political, strategic interests. You have China, Russia, Iran on one hand. Russia and Iran are together as far as Iran has its own stakes when it comes to Syria. And there are also reports confirming that the whole exercise is to an extent also to isolate Iran. But if you look at the China's interest in Syria, they're more than what the Russians have actually. The economic interest particularly. Not much is being talked about it. Even in 2011, their trade was about $2 billion, little more than $2 billion, what they were importing. Right. So I think, it's not an easy situation at the moment. It's very tough decision that the Obama administration have to take now, but the consequences, I think, is something which is of great concern to all of us.
Right. Yeah. So at this time, do you think, what are the factors that would actually lead to a military intervention in Syria? Because UK has just backed out, the US now relying on France perhaps. What are the chances there that US will actually go? And is there a time frame that we can look at?
Well, I think China has called for restraint and Britain, of course, the people are not with, decision to go ahead with the strike. And I think the most important question is, what are you going to achieve by doing it? I think there is a talk that you cannot let countries, allow them to use chemical weapons and then go unpunished. Now, what would be that punishment? Is it going to be a limited strike as we are, listening and reading? But I don't know. It's very difficult to say that they're going to attack, not attack, but whatever we are listening at the moment is that they're all set to attack.
Right. It's interesting, how the US puts it. It's going to be a limited strike.
Yes.
But once the strike does take place, then who knows, what turn that's going to take.
How it's going to escalate. And let's not forget, the jihadi forces which are very much part and parcel there. It's a civil war. It's a war within war, there was a time when, opposition versus the regime. Now there is a divided opposition in Syria. And, the moderates, the extremists. So it's a very complicated, and personally, as a researcher, I would say that one should not hurry up and, strike Syria. That is my personal opinion as a researcher. But I think one should give little time to the political solution in a sense that maybe some negotiation before you, come to the conclusion of striking a country.
Talking about the end of the crisis, even if the military intervention does happen, the question is, as you correctly pointed out, will it really end the crisis, or things will go
escalate?
Things will go perhaps horribly wrong over there, because we are talking about people dying after the military intervention, and the death toll will be obviously much more than what we've seen in the past few months.
Well, as I've already articulated, that the impact is going to be on the people, the civilians, and I think one has to think, when we are looking at the use of the chemical weapons and how it has hit the children and men, women, those who have nothing to do with these, politics or, other interests that the regional or the extra-regional powers have in the country. The people are going to pay the price of the war. And that is why I think one should at least give little more time, before one takes a call of, striking a country and taking a military, action against Syria. What we've seen in Iraq, we don't see any peace, any kind of stability in Iraq. We don't see stability in Libya. We don't see stability in Afghanistan. Is military a solution to the problem? I don't think so. I mean, personally, as a researcher, I don't think you can probably maintain the status quo with the military intervention. But if you want to talk about stability and peace, that obviously, military actions will not deliver that.
Ms. Roy, you've said it, more killings is not the answer, certainly, and negotiation is something which should be worked out till the very last moment. But it is very unfortunate that the world powers have to look at such an alternative as far as Syria is concerned. We have had so many examples in the past which prove that this is not the only solution, and not a successful one at that. Thank you so much for joining me on World Panorama and sharing those thoughts with us.
Thank you very much.
All right, time for a short break. More reports coming up in just a bit. Take a look at these visuals, meanwhile, from Washington, where history was celebrated. Thousands gathered at the National Mall on the 28th of August to commemorate civil rights leader Martin Luther King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech 50 years ago.
Last March was never finished. The Poor People's Campaign was never finished.
You're watching World Panorama. Japan issued its gravest warning about the state of the wrecked Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, gravest since the facility on the Pacific coast suffered a triple meltdown in 2011. Now, even if the warning does not come for the same reasons, the plant's operator, Tokyo Electric Power Company, has been accused of covering up the extent of the problems at the plant. Things look pretty grim.
Japan's apocalypse continues. Emergency conditions persist. Fukushima's radioactive discharges can't be stopped. They continue. Perhaps that's why the Japanese foreign minister was seen visiting the Ukrainian town of Chernobyl, the site of the 1986 nuclear disaster, with a fact-finding mission. What was to follow raised alarm throughout, raising questions yet again on the safety of nuclear plants world over. Japan officially raised the severity rating of the latest radioactive water leak at the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant to level 3 on an international scale for radiological releases.
どれくらい漏れたかとか、どういう状況なのかとか、どれくらいの放射能が入ってたのかということは確定してるわけじゃないんですよね。で、どこに行ってんのかもまだ分かってないっていうような状況なので、そのレベル3っていうのは一応その IAEA の基準に基づいて評価したらそのぐらいになりますということであって。
The upgrade by Japan's Nuclear Regulation Authority raises the rating of what was Japan's first warning on the International Nuclear and Radiological Event Scale since the 3 reactor meltdowns at the Fukushima plant in March 2011, which was triggered by a massive earthquake and tsunami.
300トンというのは大変な量の水ですから、それが漏れてたのが毎日のように巡視して気がつかなかったとすると、一体何でだっていうのはますますその私の頭の中は混迷の度合いを深めてるんで。
The concerns regarding the situation in Fukushima have grown after it was revealed last week that 300 tons of highly contaminated water had leaked from a storage tank. As Fukushima sends shockwaves around the world, experts are asking whether developing nations can safely develop nuclear power facilities of their own. Japan is a highly developed nation, so well prepared for disasters. If it can end up in such a mess, what hope do poorer, less well-organized countries have of preventing disasters at nuclear facilities?
The Australian Prime Minister and the opposition leader were back on the same stage again in their third round of debate for the election campaign. Both Kevin Rudd and Tony Abbott confronted some uncomfortable questions from the audience of undecided voters, but there was no knockout blow.
As campaigning continues ahead of Australia's general election next month, the two top candidates, Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and opposition leader Tony Abbott, held a third televised debate, this time in the form of a public forum with questions from undecided voters. Asked by an audience member about his role in Gilad's downfall, Rudd was unapologetic.
We resolved that through an open ballot of our party, and as a result of that, I was able to prevail. People will have different views about those events, and that will be appropriately concluded on by the historians in political history. I can say that through all of that, I believe I was doing absolutely the right thing by the party and by the country.
Another question from an audience member was what would both parties do about inward investors buying Australian land?
I think it's important that we maintain control of our own country, but the one thing that no one can take away is our land. I mean, they can buy our products and take that away.
But they buy our land.
But they can't take the land away. Now, I think we've got to do what is in Australia's national interest. And if selling a bit of land to a foreigner is in our national interest, and it might be in some circumstances, particularly if that person is going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in that land, well, I'm in favour of it. If it's not in our national interest, well then it shouldn't happen. And that's why we've got a Foreign Investment Review Board, which is scrutinising major purchases of our assets by foreigners.
Local media reported that Prime Minister Kevin Rudd won the debate with 45 votes and Abbott got 38, with 19 still undecided. Rudd's government is well behind in opinion polls, which suggest he will be thrown out of office on September 7th in favour of Conservative opposition leader Tony Abbott.
Right, much else has been unfolding around the world. Here's a quick wrap of other international news of the week. At least 7 people were killed and dozens more wounded in an attack claimed by the Taliban on a military base in eastern Afghanistan on August 28. Taliban militants set off car bombs at 2 ends of the base in Ghazni province before trying to storm the facility, triggering a 6-hour gun battle with Afghan and Polish forces. Violence has intensified across Afghanistan this week as Taliban insurgents seek to increase pressure on NATO contingents, preparing to withdraw by the end of 2014. Egypt's cabinet on Wednesday approved an additional $3.2 billion in spending on investment projects to boost the economy over the coming 10 months. The army-backed interim government is keen to improve conditions for a deeply polarized population battered by more than 2 years of political and economic turmoil. Jordanian King Abdullah II held talks with visiting Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas regarding peace talks between Palestine and Israel. The king reiterated Jordan's stance in supporting the aspirations of the Palestinian people to regain their legitimate rights. Meanwhile, President Abbas briefed the king regarding the negotiation process of the peace talks, especially in regard to final status issues which are of utmost concern for Jordan. China's foreign minister held a meeting with foreign ministers of 10 ASEAN countries in Beijing amid strained ties due to maritime territorial disputes. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said in a statement that the meeting will mainly focus on strengthening the China-ASEAN strategic partnership. Clashes broke out in western Argentina as thousands marched against a possible accord between Argentine energy company YPF and Chevron. The potential agreement is currently under debate in the local legislature of the western Neuquén province. Some 5,000 demonstrators took to the streets to march against the accord. As the protest gathered steam, riot police shot tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the marchers. Greece's public service workers walked off the job halfway through their shifts on Thursday and demonstrated in the Greek capital as the government proceeds with plans to sack or transfer thousands. By the end of the year, 25,000 civil servants will be transferred to other jobs in the public sector to fill gaps, while by the end of 2014, 15,000 civil servants will lose their jobs altogether. Unemployment in Greece is at 27% following the financial crisis which erupted in 2010. Shifting gears, time to bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed through this week. Here's all the sports action.
England came close to pulling off a surprise victory over Australia in the fifth and final test on Sunday, but had to settle for a draw when umpires stopped play because of bad light. A day that started half an hour late and which was heading towards a dull draw ended in a 3-0 Ashes series victory for the home team. England were presented with the tiny pottery urn said to contain the ashes of English cricket awarded to the winners of cricket's famous rivalry. England, who have now won 3 Ashes series in a row for the first time since 1977 to 1981, celebrated with a lap of honour while fireworks blazed over the pavilion. Chelsea have boosted their striking options with the signing of veteran Cameroon international Samuel Eto'o. Eto'o has signed a 1-year deal at Chelsea from Anzi Makashkala and will team up with former boss Jose Mourinho. Chelsea targeted Eto'o, who could cost around £5 million after admitting defeat in Mourinho's pursuit of Manchester United forward Wayne Rooney. Venus Williams was knocked out of the US Open on Wednesday, beaten 6-3, 2-6, 7-6 by China's Zheng Ji after the pair slugged it out for more than 3 hours. The 33-year-old American, the second oldest player in the women's singles draw, staged an incredible fight back to push the match into a deciding tiebreak, but ultimately came up just short as she suffered her third successive second-round exit at Flushing Meadows.
Well, time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies, music and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap.
A brief ceremony and action-packed space film Gravity marked the beginning of 11 days of movie madness on the Venice Lido on the 28th of August. 20 films, including 5 from the United States and 3 British ones, are in competition for the Golden Lion Trophy at the Venice Film Festival that will be awarded at the end of the festival's 70th edition. The festival got off to an explosive start on Wednesday with the premiere of Gravity, teaming George Clooney and Sandra Bullock as astronauts imperiled by a botched Russian missile shot. Ahead of the world premiere screening, the festival was officially declared open during a brief ceremony with the organizers and jury members taking the stage. Ethan Hawke and Selena Gomez were all smiles as they cruised the red carpet in Los Angeles for the premiere of their high-octane action thriller Getaway. Under the direction of Courtney Solomon, the film stars Hawke as former race car driver Brent Magna, who is pitted against the clock in a desperate effort to save the life of his kidnapped wife. Getaway opened in theatres on the 30th of August.
What is he after?
I don't know. Do exactly as I say, and your wife lives.
She's beautiful.
choice to me.
Madonna is the world's top earning celebrity according to a Forbes list released, raking in an estimated $125 million in the past year, mainly from her $305 million grossing MDNA tour, but helped by sales of clothing, fragrance and various investments. Director Steven Spielberg, who had a big hit last year with Lincoln, was a distant second with earnings of $100 million in the year ended June 2013. Oprah Winfrey, who topped the list last year, dropped down to number 13, earning $77 million. Others in the top 10 earners included TV host Glenn Beck, director Michael Bay of the Transformers franchise, and thriller novelist James Patterson. Star Hollywood couple Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones have separated in what could spell the end of their nearly 13-year marriage. According to People magazine, Douglas and Zeta-Jones, both Oscar winners and among Hollywood's most high-profile couples, have in recent months vacationed separately, appeared at red carpet events without the other, and are ostensibly living apart.
And that's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This week, I close the show with visuals of the legendary Tomatina Festival of Spain. From this year on, revelers had to pay to get hit by ripe tomatoes. Yes, this year it took 130 tons of tomatoes to paint the Spanish town of Bunol red. Goodbye.